All right, hey, if you're over 50 and you're concerned about probate or accidental disinheritance, you're not alone and you're going to want to hang out for today's episode. All right, grab your favorite mug. It's time for Coffee with Your Retirement Coach. Welcome back to Coffee with Your Retirement Coach. I'm your host, Aaron. Our coaches behind the clipboard, Nick and Randy Yeomans.
What's up, Aaron?
Listen, today we're talking about estate planning. Because a lot of times when people think about nightmares after someone's passing, in the good movies, it has to do with greed and pettiness and spite. And the reality is what we often see in our industry is a lot of neglect and lack of understanding. And we feel like it's worth taking the time today because as we pointed out at the beginning of today's episode, a lot of people, when they get in their mid-40s and beyond, they start wondering because they've been exposed to something, whether directly by way of their parents or a family issue or a friend. They're like, man, I would really like for my inheritors not to go through this, and I'd like to have a better idea of what's set up and how it works.
Yeah, well, and I think this is a really important episode because there is so much misinformation out there.
Yeah.
There's so much that people don't understand. And when you walk through, losing a loved one for the first time, it can be really challenging. Like, how does this all work? Who do I talk to? What do I need? And it can be cumbersome, clumsy, confusing, and really, a family that's already in grief can be even more distraught. So what I thought we could do today is really divide into two pieces. One, how do we avoid probate? And two, how do we avoid disinheritance?
Yeah.
I mean, because really, those are two big ones that we get asked about all of the time. And there's so many people concerned. And Randy, you're a certified estate planner. You've been doing this for, 100 to 150 years, something like that. But you've certainly seen like the highs, the lows. You've seen what's worked well and not worked well. And I know we've done this hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times with families at this point in time in our career. So what I thought I'd start with is let's talk about probate. Something I hear a lot is I want to avoid probate, so I got a will.
Yeah, that's interesting because in reality, a will doesn't avoid probate. A will is in essence a letter to the probate court, so it's almost ensuring probate. And I think what we hear also is that in certain states, probate is no big deal. And I think what that means is it may not take as long as people are concerned about or may not be as expensive, but they're looking at the cost of the transaction.
Right.
What they're not looking at is the cost of things like disinheriting your kids.
Right.
And or paying a lot of extra taxes because of what happens to go through the probate process is what's not understood by the public.
Just because your state is more favorable than another state, probate is never fast, it's never free, and the documents that you need to successfully transition through this point, they're not one size fits all.
Yeah. Well, and I think what a lot of people also forget is that, the Latin word for probate is to prove. Okay. So you're proving the legality of your wishes. Who you've appointed will carry those wishes out. But it is a court process that you're going through.
Yeah.
And, probate is public.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. A will is public. And a lot of people are trying to keep privacy. Yeah. And so to your point, Randy, when somebody says, I'm trying to avoid probate and I did a will and like that doesn't work, it's because it is that letter to probate. So what are some things that people can think about in terms of assets or structure to truly help them avoid probate?
So let me do this. First of all, there's a lot of ways to avoid probate, and we can talk about them. And that's important. But the problem is a lot of times people avoiding probate actually do a lot of bad things to themselves. So the big key is, and I know I've said this before on one of our podcasts, but if I review an estate plan, a will, a trust, anybody's estate plan, they've been to a great law firm. I'm telling you 90% of the time, which is an outrageous thing to say, and I know that, and I've been challenged on that, but 90% of the estate plans I review do not work the way their clients intended it to. Mm-hmm. And it's very simple. One of the things is that a will, first of all, trying to avoid probate. Will doesn't avoid probate, but the big key with this is a will controls assets in your name only.
Yeah.
So it doesn't joint tenants with rights of survivorship, a beneficiary asset. So if you look at the typical millionaire next door, our typical client who saved well, done all of this work to be in a place financially where they feel secure, and they have their loved ones and organizations that they care about, and they want to make sure that their wishes are taken care of. So they spend the money to get a good law firm to create their documents, and the documents still don't work. And they're great documents. Here's the issue. Typical husband and wife, they own their bank account jointly, they own their home jointly, they own other investment property jointly. They have things like beneficiary assets like life insurance, annuities, 457s, 401ks, IRAs, Roths. They all have a beneficiary form on them. They all, in essence, have a will attached to them. They have directions. So you could lay out an elaborate description of what you want to have happen in your will. I want to take care of my spouse. If something happens to my spouse, I want to take care of my children. If something happens to a child, I want to make sure that the money goes down to my grandchildren, et cetera, et cetera. That will, at the first death, most of it is null and void for the typical millionaire next door, because all the assets automatically transfer to the spouse or a third party through a beneficiary form. So any tax language, any special provisions for disability, any special provisions to create a legacy to go to the next generation are wiped out at the first death because of how the assets are.
And here's even, we're talking, Aaron, about like avoiding the big missteps, right? The big mistakes that are just so easy. One of the big ones I see that, you could have avoided probate, you could have avoided accidental disinheritance, but what you accidentally did that you just didn't know any different, or maybe a well-meaning professional told you to do, is they took that retirement account or life insurance policy or an annuity that had beneficiary language on it, and they say, instead of putting someone's name, you've done this great will, why don't you just put my estate on there, or the estate, of, blah, 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 your name, and, that way it'll go through your will. But what else happens when it's a retirement account?
Immediate.
Well, you blow it up, and I think under the current law, you can extend the tax liability or the distributions over 5 years, and it didn't have to be that way. But now you also took a retirement account that could have avoided probate, and you've sent it through probate.
All right, so let's back up, because I had an amazing conversation with a client, and it ended hilariously, because they looked at me and they said, I don't understand what you're telling me. I have a will, and I've got these beneficiary forms, but I've got the will. And I'm like, let me help you out. Did you ever play Rochambeau as a kid? Looked at me, I said, rock, paper, scissors. Oh, yeah. Your will is scissors, and the beneficiary forms are rocks. And I said, the scissors are great till the rocks come. It's that simple. They win. And that's the hard part that you first have to understand. And then simply, it's just like Monopoly. I said, we're going to stay on the game theme. If you put it to my estate, you go directly to jail. You do not pass go, and you're going to pay those taxes, and you're going to not have the opportunity of planning. And I think because there are not enough conversations that are that simplistic in nature and that forward pointing, there's people that assume they're in good shape. They hope that they've done it right. They're not. It's what we said in the beginning. It's the neglect and the lack of understanding.
So let's be clear, though. If you know what you're doing, and again, majority of people have never had this experience and they're not getting good guidance, you can actually send your retirement account through a trust provision in your will if you know how to fill out the beneficiary form right. I never see it. It's like I never see it. It's not like I don't see it a lot. I never see it done the way it should be done.
Well, and even then, Randy, the will or the trust has to have the right retirement plan language in it, even if you're doing that. If you don't have that conversation with the attorney, even assuming that you're dealing with a really competent attorney, if that gets missed, it still won't work.
So one thing I've learned over the years, and I think this is really probably one of the key points that we want to emphasize, when you get an estate plan done, whether you're using wills or trusts, wills and trusts, or whatever you might be doing to create, the documents are not the plan. The documents aren't the plan. The plan is done first, and the documents support the plan.
That's good.
So what happens is, frequently, clients see their attorney. The attorney asks them questions. They create a document out of it. And then the client has that release that they've done something positively. They checked it off the list, and they feel good. So here's what you need to know. You need to know this, whether it's a will or a trust. You have to, in essence, settle your estate while you're alive. You have to go through the process of as if you died, would my estate plan work? And if you go through that process and you have understanding, it's probably going to take some guidance from certified estate planner, some financial professional that has a history of doing this, especially attorneys who specialize in that. Walk it through and how it would work.
Yeah.
True conversation this weekend. I'm telling you, I run into this all the time. I'm actually at a conference this last weekend, and it's the meeting after the meeting, which I always call the best part of the meeting. So there's a group of us sitting around, and I happen to have the good fortune of sitting next to a retired major general. Phenomenal guy.
Yeah. Wow.
He's written a book, hasn't been released yet. There's 19 times he cited that he should be dead. I mean, literally, but by a miracle of God that he's still here. So he feels like he's got a book in him. He's got a reason to be here. We're talking, and one of the other gentlemen there works for the National Christian Foundation, and we're having a dialogue, and he overhears this dialogue. And he said, that happened to me. What happened to you? He said, well, my dad, honestly, very well off. And he remarried later in life, and his will sent everything to his new wife and disinherited my brother and I. Gone. And I know that that wasn't his dad's intent. But what happens is if you don't settle your estate while you're alive, go through that difficult changing beneficiaries, changing ownership, understanding the design of the plan, then that's why 90% of plans don't work. And I'm listening to this gentleman, and he's a little frustrated. He's done really well for himself, but that wasn't his dad's intent. And this kind of stuff happens all the time. And that's why I guess I get kind of excited about it. I'm concerned that people don't think that that can happen to them. When it's been my experience, it probably will happen to you unless you do this extra work.
Do you feel like it's taboo or complication that gives people that pause to really jump into this?
That is good, Aaron. I tell you what I think. I think people don't want to go to their parents as their parents are getting older and go, have you got your plan in order? Is it good? Or they've got a mom and dad that says, we're good, or it's handled, and it's not handled.
Yeah.
But it's very difficult. So
I tell you, family communication has to happen. The most successful families we work with by far have a family communication plan. They have family meetings.
Yes.
They talk about it. We've conducted, I don't know how many family meetings over just this last year where we're bringing everyone together. And to our listeners, our audience today, that doesn't mean the kids have to know all your stuff. They don't have to know all your numbers, but they should at least have some kind of understanding of what you've put in place. Yeah. Because if your intent is to remove to the extent possible, remove friction, remove tension, remove the possibility that your kids end up fighting when you're gone, you gotta have that communication. And here's my challenge. So many people have this syndrome. It's called the not me, not now syndrome.
Yeah.
Well, it's not going to happen to me, and if so, it's not going to happen now. We could kind of relate that to even how we view our kids or our heirs. My kids get along great. It would never happen to them. I'll come back from the grave and haunt them. They'll get along. How many times have we seen family friction over $10,000 difference?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And we want to keep the peace. We want to do everything we can to reduce the friction in the family.
When you're talking, Aaron, I'm just hearing this. And I know, like I challenge myself when I think about this, but I want you to assume it's wrong. If you're hearing this podcast and you're thinking, like Nick's saying, I want you to assume the opposite.
Yeah.
Because the worst thing that occurs is you spend the time and energy to do the schematic and look at everything, and it's perfect.
Yeah.
So you wasted some time. You can't get that time back.
Yeah.
But I tell you, if you go through that and you find gaping holes in it, where the beneficiaries aren't right, and that's another thing, if you don't mind, people don't understand how that works. So I put a beneficiary down. If I put a child down as the beneficiary of one of my accounts, and I pass away, and the contingent beneficiary, for example, is my grandchild, if I die and I leave that money to my child, and then my child dies, who gets the money? And 90% of the time, people say, well, your grandchild. I say, no. whoever my child named as a beneficiary.
Yeah.
So if it's important to me that that money ends up going down, and this is a statistic that's worth knowing. So I say that 90% of the estate plans I review don't work the way the client wants them to. It doesn't mean the documents are bad. It means that nobody went through that process to make sure that the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, beneficiaries are changed, ownerships change, and everything in the settling of it, okay? 97% of the wealth left by the millionaire next door, the client who saved really hard their entire life, lived below their means so they could accumulate some financial security, 97% of the time it never makes it to the third generation.
Yeah.
And to me, having grandchildren, I just got to say, I like them better.
Oh, that's fantastic. I do want to bring something up here because the listener that emailed us, that was the catalyst for this episode. This is right in line with what they were talking about. There was a side thing, but I want to bring us back in because there's some people going, okay, I'm hearing a lot of cautionary tale, but not a lot of good actionable items. So what this means is build an inventory of everything.
Good.
Meet with your advisor, meet with your attorney, make sure that you know what are your objectives. The problem is you could have retired in the same year as a coworker that worked at the job the same time frame that you did. Maybe their pension is similar, maybe their 401k is similar, but is privacy important to them? Are they in a first or second marriage? None of it matters about what your friends, neighbors are into. You need to have that personal conversation with your team, your wise counsel, and then make sure those beneficiaries, those TODs, trust, wills, all of those documents are in order. The other thing that's important, if you're truly wanting to help that next generation, and I found this out from this listener, and thank you so much, and I know you're paying attention today. Thank you, because others can learn from what you were sharing. I hope this helps a lot of people. We went through their stuff and kind of let them know this was what we would tackle today. But then we started hearing about the entire family, right? So they had siblings. Parents had passed away. So they were saying, it's all at this level. I'm not worried about what I'm getting. It's everything from my husband and I to our kids and grandkids. And this is exactly what they were talking about. But through conversation, we find out that there was a sibling that inherited the parents' house. The sibling never married, has no children. And so I brought up, okay, well, what about the sibling? And the person said, no, I'm just worried about us. And I said, right, but you said you were worried about probate and inheritance for your kids. And they said, I'm not following. I said, listen, you've told me that your sibling has no estate planning documents, possibly as many as 5 or 6 small work plans out there, and they own that house by themselves. If they die intestate and the state through probation starts to, it's going to be heirs at law, which will either be your siblings or your kids or your grandkids getting tripped up. So all the work that you're doing, your kids could still be in the courts dealing with inheritance stuff. So if you're really wanting things to be smooth for your kids because of what you've learned and what you know now, thanks to having some coffee with your coaches, you need to have the conversation with your sibling. You need to encourage them to do the work themselves, because you're doing the heavy lift.
Yeah. Well, in a situation like that, especially power of attorney, healthcare directives. Because that's a dynamic that nobody wants to be in, because that is living probate.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's another important. I mean, there are two sides to probate, but I want to turn this back around just for a minute, because as we were talking about disinheritance and the potential of that, if our audience was to have a few takeaways, some things to be thinking of today, you need to collect all of your titles to your real estate, look at the title of your bank accounts, title to anything in your own name. You need to understand what the titling is.
Yes.
Understand you have a great laid out plan, as you were talking about, Randy, but if it's rights of survivorship, it won't go through the will or the trust or other documents you put in. It's going to go to the other spouse. If they remarry Fifi, it goes to Fifi and Fifi's kids.
Yeah.
Right?
It's not enough to know.
Story. Or Pierre.
The inventory is what we own, how we own it. And then to your point, if we own something jointly, is it joint tenants with rights of survivorship? Is it joint tenants in entirety? I have a little test.
Okay. So I know we will run out of time here pretty quickly. Let me just make sure, because we do want to get people meat from this. So we've talked about a lot of problems. Here's a test that you can do to determine whether or not you seriously need to take action. First of all, I'm going to tell you 50% of the people listening to this don't have an estate plan. They don't even have documents. I'm not picking on you. I'm telling you, let's get that handled.
Yeah.
It's our personal responsibility to do that. Make your life and other people's lives better. Okay. Second thing is, if you've already done the hard work, you've already met with the attorney, estate planning team, et cetera, and you've already got documents. Here's the test. When you met with the attorney or the firm that helped create your estate planning documents, did they get deeds? Did they get ownership of your business? Did they get stock? Did they get bank accounts? Did they get beneficiary forms? Did they get all of these things that show how things are owned and what you own in their office? Did they get it? Did they ask for those copies? Because I'm going to tell you, if they didn't get that stuff, there's no way for them to tell you with confidence if your estate plan is going to work.
Right.
Well, and that's great. And I want to circle back because that's absolutely where I was going. Title, we have to have the beneficiary forms, and it all has to match up with the documents.
Right.
It's impossible to do estate planning without reviewing title and beneficiary.
Right.
It won't work.
It's like going to the doctor and they don't do any lab work, they don't do any blood work, and they just prescribe.
But this is generally accepted penicillin. Right? Well, and so let's go to disinheritance for a second, because we're talking about this with the mindset of avoiding probate, which there's one other real key tool I want to talk about in just a minute. But I do want to spend just a second about the number one reason I think we see disinheritance, the number one by far, is that it's accidental.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Most disinheritance I see, it is completely accidental. It's the wrong person on a beneficiary form or no person on a beneficiary form.
Yeah.
I just taught a class at Kennesaw State University, had 15 or so students. I gave them homework. I said, when you come back next week, your homework between now and next week, pull all of your beneficiary forms and make sure the right people are on them, right percentages, etc.
Yeah.
3 people came back and had wrong beneficiary forms.
Yeah.
That's a problem if you've got a $10,000 account. It's a big problem if you've got $1 million IRA.
It's true. It's true.
100%. So one of the things that we could do, as we're thinking about disinheritance and making sure that does not happen, especially, man, if you're a blended family, you have to be so careful here.
Yep.
We don't even have time to go into the nuances of that, but you've got to look at probably 40% of the families out there have that nuance of children from different marriages. It's a second marriage. It's a widowed person. It's a single person. I mean, there's all kinds of dynamics where the planning needs to be specific to their demographic.
So we're going to table, there's 2 different types of probate.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Most people just think death probate.
Right.
But there's also living probate. What if you're incapacitated or something like that? Yeah. I'm going to table that one for a second. And Randy, there's a tool that is so misunderstood today that really we won't be able to get all of the way in the weeds. But this tool is could be, again, this is state. There are some state exceptions to this, but I'd love for you to spend a minute about a revocable living trust. Yeah. Because if your real intent is to avoid probate, I think we can't have this episode and not address that.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan. I've had a revocable living trust since the 90s. Pretty much everything I own is either owned by that trust or is a manager of other assets as the trust. So what a trust does is it basically gives beneficiaries to everything you own. Mm-hmm. And this idea of settling your estate while you're alive, what I like about it is, depending on how it's created, putting language in there that will allow the executor type of person, which is called a trustee typically in a living trust, to be able to look at the tax law, look at the rules, look at the dynamics of the beneficiaries, and elect through the language that's put in the document as to how things should be settled. Okay? And we're actually settling one right now. Yesterday, had a fantastic meeting with the successor trustee of a late client, and there's provisions in there for different dynamics of family members. The family members are all in very different sets of circumstances, and this is allowing them, without going through the probate process, to take a look at all the parents' assets and, while avoiding probate, make educated decisions on the different needs of the family.
All right, and I'm going to prompt you here, okay? Right, because this is exactly what I want to make sure our audience takes away here. They are following the rules of this trust
Yes.
that were put in place before they passed away,
Yep.
and they aren't having any court interference.
Correct. And I want to give credit to this client who is my late client now. Great guy. I found out all kinds of wonderful things about him. Unfortunately, post-mortem, after he passed away, I found out the rest of his story. He was so humble, and what a fantastic guy. But what happened is he spent the time with us to make sure all the I's were dotted and all the T's were crossed. We had everything in the trust that could be in the trust. The beneficiary forms were right, the assets, the real estate, everything was right. Fairly large estate and no probate. And so there's no interference, and the trusted trustee is able to navigate everything. And so in essence, what we did is we settled his estate before he passed. And
Awesome.
everything, it doesn't always work perfectly, but I have found personally by getting things properly registered and what the trust does, and again, a real quick aside, people have been told this by different professionals that don't do a trust because it's very complicated. Listen to this. Because what you have to do is you have to change the ownership, and you have to do, change the beneficiary. You have to do all this stuff for the trust to work. Listen to me. You have to do that anyway. You have to do that with a will. And if you don't do it, your will is basically a useless document. So I don't care whether it's a trust or a will. You have to go through that process of making sure that the ownership of the assets match what your intent is in the will or the trust.
But Randy, we're not worth $50 million.
Yeah.
Randy, we don't have $100 million. I was told I don't need a trust.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know that you didn't have $100 million.
Yeah.
But
I'm at 99. I'm trying to get there.
So that trust, I've had people say, I'm not wealthy. So the way I look at it is, there's a lot of dynamics as to where somebody who maybe isn't even all that affluent might want to trust. Avoiding probate is one of them. And avoiding probate in other states is a big one. So one other thing that happens that we didn't talk about in today's episode to any great degree is many of our clients have a home in North Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, a vacation property, or Florida. So we have a lot of clients all over the country who own assets in different states. And if you die with assets in these other states, you're going to go through probate in each of those states. It's a pain to go through it in one state. It's a real pain to go through it in multiple
100%.
states, multiple counties. Yeah. And the rules in some of these places are very different.
The rules, the cost, the complexities. Yeah.
So what the trust does is by putting those assets in the trust, you can avoid probate in all the states and put everything under an umbrella. I wish we had time to really expand upon that. Perhaps we have an episode coming up just on revocable trusts and irrevocable trusts.
Well, and Randy, I love how you laid that out, because this is such an important tool that does so many really, really great things. But my key list here to see if somebody qualifies to do a trust is really these three things. Number one, is control important to you? Are you trying to stay in control? In our industry, there's even a term, control from beyond the grave, right? Is control important? Number two, is privacy important to you? A will is a public document, a trust is a private document. And number three is avoiding probate. Is that important to you? Because a basic revocable living trust can give you those three things. And I think for a lot of people that are hung up on, I don't have the millions and millions and millions, or I don't have crazy complexity, but that's not really what a basic revocable trust is about. And I think sometimes we get lost because we're dealing with really maybe some great professionals who don't understand what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. And I would say one last thing about that. So a trust can be created out of a will post-mortem, and it can be created out of a trust, a separate trust. And part of the reasons that a lot of our clients do this is to give protection to their children and grandchildren. So in other words, if the proper provisions are put into a good will and everything is properly titled, or a trust, which is my preferred way, then language in that trust can allow the creation of a trust for your beneficiaries that doesn't go away. So it becomes an irrevocable trust. And the reason that some of our clients want to do that is they want to make sure that the money is available for their spouse, then it's available for their child, and then anything that's left is going to the grandchildren. The other important aspect of that is to try to avoid, in the event of a lawsuit, those assets getting pulled into the lawsuit through something which is the most common lawsuit in America today, which is divorce.
Right.
So that's a more complicated setup. But if you want to know how all of this stuff works, there are tools available to you that we can share with you.
Yep. So great news. You, in your 50s, you can cause your inheritors, the people you care about, exactly who you want to receive your assets, the way you want them to receive it, and you can do it in such a way that it can avoid probate. It's going to require a few things: a very robust and detailed inventory, an understanding of what we have, the tax consequences associated with those assets, and controlling documents or beneficiaries, transfer on death, payable on death associated with those things. The right team, making sure that we're talking to our financial advisors and our attorneys and expressing to them what our desires are, what our concerns are. We want to be as open and honest as possible. Talk about things like protection. We want to talk about things like privacy, our concerns or aversions to probate, and help them to work with us to build out a blueprint to get the type of documents that we need so that we can settle our estate before we pass, and we can really care for the ones that we really care about. Again, a little bit of homework and going to be a little bit of upkeep. This isn't a one time and done. The laws change, our goals and our families change. But again, it's one of those things. Neglect is what causes these plans to be upended. And then the last little curveball, make sure, because we know about ourselves, but evangelize to the left and the right. Talk to your siblings about good estate planning practices. Talk to your parents, talk to your grandparents. It's a difficult conversation, but it's a worthwhile one to have more of the things that we care about going to the people that we care about it in the appropriate way for our plan. I want to thank you for being here. We hope that you stay coachable. Thank you so much for the email today that encouraged this episode. And if you have an idea for a future episode or questions that might be a little bit more personal or on a different topic, email us at connect@yourretirementcoach.com. As always, want to encourage you to subscribe, like, and share the podcast. But most importantly, again, stay coachable. We hope you enjoyed today's show, but you may have questions for our coaches, and they can be emailed at connect@yourretirementcoach.com. If you know someone that needs to hear this episode, we encourage you to share it. As a reminder, the content of this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only and should not be construed as advice. On behalf of our coaches, we want to thank you for listening and for being coachable.
Yeoman's Consulting Group, a registered investment advisor YouTube channel based in Marietta, Georgia. We strive to provide comprehensive wealth management services for every stage of the journey. This platform is solely for informational purposes and is not offering advisory services or sales of securities. Investing involves risk and possible loss of principal capital. Comments by viewers or recognitions are no guarantee of future investment outcomes and do not ensure that a viewer will experience a higher level of performance or results. Public comments posted on this site are not selected, amended, deleted, or sorted in any way. If applicable, certain editing of personal identifiable information and misinformation may be deleted. The opinions expressed herein are as of the date of publication and are subject to revision due to changes in the market or economic conditions and may not necessarily come to pass.